You are connected, and you are listening to Specifically for Seniors, the podcast for those in the Remember When generation. Today's podcast is available everywhere you listen to podcasts and with video at Specifically for Seniors YouTube channel. Now, here's your host, Dr. Larry Barsh.
Today on Specifically for Seniors, we're going to meet a man with so many stories to tell, many too many for a single podcast, so we'll just talk about one today. Alastair Henry retired at 57, shed his possessions, and went to live with a First Nations band in the Northwest Territories. After that, he left Canada's North to volunteer working with local NGOs, those are nonprofit organizations, in Bangladesh. After that, he and his wife enjoyed backpacking on a budget for 4 months at a time in Central America and Asia. In their 60s, in 2020, he endured a double lung transplant. Today, Alastair and I will talk about one part of his story and one of his 4 books, Awakening in the Northwest Territories, One Man's Search for Fulfillment. Welcome to Specifically for Seniors, Alastair. It's great to have you on.
What would you like to know?
Let's introduce our listeners. Let's introduce our listeners to the first part of your life, up to age 57. Tell us about your childhood, your upbringing, your education, occupation, and how you got to retire at such a young age.
Okay. I was born in Glasgow, Scotland, to parents from the Channel Islands, Jersey and Guernsey, in the English Channel. They were evacuated in 1939 when the Germans invaded and occupied. So they were in Glasgow for 6 years. And it was only in 1945, when the Germans finally surrendered and left, we went back to the islands to live for a while. But my mother had a bad heart. And the doctor said, you got to go and live somewhere where the land is flatter. You can't go pushing prams up and down hills all day. So we went to Bolton, Lancashire, and that's where I grew up. And that's where I got my accent. And then at 18, I fell in love with a 17-year-old. And we'd only been dating a couple of months when she turned around and said, I'm going to Canada. I'm emigrating with my family. And I said, no way. You can't leave me. I'm going to come. 4 months later, I said goodbye to my parents, my siblings, and I went down to Liverpool, got on a boat, and came out to Canada to join her. She was 18, I was 19. We got married, had 3 children, and life was wonderful. I got into the corporate life. Really, I worked very, very hard. I became very, very ambitious, very goal-oriented, a high achiever, and I wanted to be a vice president by the time I was 40. And I was, as a vice president of finance. But in my 40s, I began wondering, why did I feel so anxious? I didn't feel totally happy. I thought, well, maybe I got to work for myself, working for other people. Maybe that's it. And maybe I need to work for myself to find this personal fulfillment. So in 98, I started a freight brokerage company with my son. And we worked hard at it over the next 12 years. Provider. Did very well. Went from nothing to 12 million in sales, and I sold it. So I retired. So I went to live in this beautiful country retreat, if you like, 50 acres, 5 ponds, and a river running through it. But after 2 years, I was beginning to feel anxious again and restless. And the novelty of having all this time to play golf and cut grass, it was wearing off. And I thought, is this it? Is this all there is? Is this all I'm going to do for the rest of my life? I'm only 59. And the answer to that was no. There's got to be more to life. I didn't want to go back in the city. Didn't want to go back in the corporate world. So I thought, well, I need an adventure. I need to set off on some sort of adventure, something with a bit of an edge to it. And that's when I found this job in the Northwest Territories.
So you had a job in the Northwest Territories, and that's what brought you to a First Nations band?
Yeah, I was looking around on the internet, and this First Nations band in the Northwest Territories was looking for a general manager to run their development corporations. But the really interesting thing for me was they were also looking for some help in negotiating some agreements with De Beers, the diamond mines. Diamonds were discovered in 1992 in the Northwest Territories. And BHP Billiton and Rio Tinto were already up there with their diamond mines. And De Beers had 2 properties on Snap Lake and Kennedy Lake. And before they could go ahead, they needed to get agreement from the Lutsel K'e First Nations band. They needed a participation agreement whereby people from the community get to work at the mines, and a contribution agreement, which is really money for land, because they'd be, drilling and affecting the environment, if you like. There was a negotiation about dollars, so the band got money every year from the diamond companies. So I applied, had some interviews, offered me the job. So I set out and went to Lutsel K'e.
Okay, so this wasn't exactly going unprepared to the Northwest Territories.
Oh, it was.
You had plans for it.
Well, back in those days, I wasn't Googling anything. I could look things up in the encyclopedia and go to the library, but I set off. I didn't really do a lot of, probably had I done a lot of research, I would never have gone. But it was like going to a different world. It was like leaving Earth and landing on the moon or some planet. First of all, it's a flying community. You have to go to Yellowknife, which is the end of the road. In North America, it's the end of the road. From there, you just take little regional planes to go to these little communities. So you got a 45-minute little propeller-driven plane due east on the east arm of Great Slave Lake. That's where this little community was. It's just rocks and puddles. It's totally undeveloped. The trees are scrawny, because it's just on the border of the tree line. The trees are scrawny, scraggly, no more than 10 feet high. It's a big sky, huge sky. The sun doesn't really set in the summer till about 11 at night, and it comes up again at 2. And in the winter, it only pops up above the horizon for a couple of hours. It's cold, very cold in the winter, minus 40, minus 50. But the Chippewa, it's a totally different world. They've not been exposed really to our culture. Like, I'm a product of North America, of Canada. Collectively, I share Canadian values, Canadian habits, if you like. So to go there, it was so very different. They were so very different. Spiritually, culturally, traditionally, it was wonderful.
What band did you join exactly? You mentioned the Chippewas.
Yeah, well, I would imagine that, Larry, most of your listeners are not Canadians. They're probably US citizens, eh? So let me just
Yes.
talk a little bit about Canada. It's a huge country, second biggest in the world next to Russia in landmass. It's bordered by 3 oceans, the Atlantic, Pacific, and the Arctic. And there's 3 indigenous bands in Canada. You've got the Inuits, which we used to call Eskimos. They live right at the top of the world on the coast, but today we call them Inuits. Yeah, the Dene, which we used to call Indians, they live on the inside Canada, and there's 630 communities. Now you got to remember, back in those days, in the early days, and they've been here for thousands of years, all of them, thousands, unbelievable. There's petroglyphs, and they've done carbon dating and whatever, thousands of years. But of course, they weren't aware of each other. Canada is so big. Some of them were and traded, but most of them had no idea. So the Chippewas, they're from northern Alberta, actually. They were nomadic. So for thousands of years, they used to move up in March to the Barren Lands, the tundra, with the Beverley caribou herd, 400,000, and then back to the tree line, the arboreal forest, in September for the winter. And that was what they did. And they just totally lived off the caribou and fish. So in Canada, there's 630 communities. Lutsel K'e is one of them. There's 50 different nations with languages, spiritual beliefs, traditions, all very different. So it's not one great big homogenous, Dene nation. They're all very, very different. So what else can I tell you?
And you lived with the Chippewas.
Yeah, the Chippewas. Yeah.
How did you introduce yourself and tell them why you were there?
Well, they knew I was coming. And now, you got 300 people in a community. It's one great big community. In fact, nearly everybody's related because they call me Whitey. I wasn't, that didn't bother me. I thought, yeah, well, that's okay. And because I was an outsider, they came to me for advice. They said, can I run something by you? And they trusted, because they knew I was from the outside, I had sort of more world views. And I'd be private. I'd be discreet. So they came to trust me, and I valued their... originally at first it's like, I didn't come here to be your personal counselor. Get out of here, I'm a business person. But little by little, they came to me with different things. And, of course, I came from the corporate world with all these best practices that none of them worked up there, sort of company. We ran a couple of fire crews. So I had 16 people on the payroll. And then I had some other people working for the government of Northwest Territories. So I had a big payroll. And so I said, okay, we get paid on the 15th and the 1st of every month. Well, the day after, people came in and said, can I get an advance? It's like, no, I'm not going to give you an advance. I'll give you an advance. Everybody's going to want an advance. So I turned them away. And then they came back and said, little Johnny needs some diapers, So gradually it got to me, and I thought, well, what the heck? They've worked. They've earned the money. I owe them the money. What the hell is this? Why should I hold off paying them for 2 weeks? What gives me the right? So, I told them I don't have a really good reason. They need the money. So I forgot about the payroll every 2nd of the 15th, I sort of gave everybody an advance every day. And it worked out well. And, I thought, wow, that's amazing. And the other thing, Larry, is, in Lutsel K'e, there's only one grocery store. That's it. There's no bank, no ATM, no stores. Most people didn't even have a telephone. They didn't have credit cards. So they'd come to me and say, can you buy me something from the store in Yellowknife and have it shipped in and take it out of my pay? Well, first of all, I thought, no way, I'm not going to get into this. And then I thought, why not? I can share what I have. Just want to share your skills, but I could share this too. So I called up, I ordered the tent for the spiritual gathering. I had it flown out. And then I just took it out of her pay. No problem. So I became very valuable to the community as a financial resource. Yeah. But the thing of it is, it began to give me joy. And that's something that I never felt. In the working world, I'd always been in boardrooms and meetings, working with worksheets and budgets and, numbers. And here I was working with people. And I was so pleased that I was in a position, to give them advice or to help. So that was part of the awakening, my big awakening.
So that was your epiphany, changing from a corporate environment to working directly with people's lives.
It's part of nature. It's Mother Earth, Father Sky, Grandmother Ocean, and the siblings of the caribou and the fish. And they're so thankful. They always thank the Creator whenever I went out with them, fishing or hunting. So as soon as an animal appeared, they thanked the Creator. And if we were out on Great Slave Lake and we stopped at a little island, the first thing they did was bend down, put some tobacco under a rock, and thank the land. It's amazing. I thought this spirituality is so simple, yet refreshing, and it seems so authentic. And it caused me to realize that, I'm just a part of nature. I'm not above it. And I thought about my culture that tends to use and abuse nature. I mean, we're polluted the world. They see themselves as, caregivers, protectors of the land. And what I noticed was they're not greedy. They just take what they need. So a lot of times when we were fishing, and there's so many big fish in their lake, in the Great Slave Lake, it's amazing. You go out for half an hour and man, you can catch 2 20-pounders and that's it. That's all you need. So you don't carry on fishing and come back with a whole boatload, And I thought, that's nice, Yeah,
just what you need.
And they're so humble and in that respect. Well, they're living so simply. And the other thing I noticed, Larry, they don't have expectations. They just live in the moment. They appreciate whatever happens. And I thought about, like when I first started in this job as general manager, I set off there with my goals and objectives, and here's my expectations, what we're going to do today, And I realized that at the end of the day, we never really ever achieved our goals and objectives and expectations. And I always felt disappointed. And then I started wondering, well, why didn't I achieve my expectation? I thought, well, it doesn't matter. I didn't. That's all there is to it. And then I started to really just appreciate everything. Whatever we did, I appreciated it. And if Johnny was hungover today, well, that's why he didn't work as good. But he showed up and he did his best. So all of a sudden I became aware that doing your best is all that matters. All that matters.
So you started to change as well.
Yeah. So a lot of times, the government would call me and say, well, we need 3 guys on Friday when the plane lands. Can you arrange it? I said, yeah, sure, no problem. Now, in the past, I would go around and I would ask 3 people, and they say, oh, yeah, thanks. I'll be there Friday. But when Friday came, they weren't there. They were out, they'd gone fishing, they'd gone hunting. So what I did is I just drove around town, wound my window down and said, hey, Joe, you want to work today? hop in. That's how I did it. I always found the labour I needed. But the government thought I was prearranging it, but it's impossible to prearrange it. They don't commit. They don't want to know. They don't plan for tomorrow, next year. They don't have RSPs, and they don't worry like us. They just live in the moment. And you have to, Larry, because the North is a very dangerous place. And if you're not mindfully aware, you can get into trouble very quickly. There's blizzards, there's bears, there's ice. So you have to be in the moment. Whereas, before I was multitasking, man, had 10 or 12 things running through my mind. And I learned to let go of all of that and just stay in the moment. Whatever happens, happens. And just go with it, Go with the flow and make it up as you go. I loved it.
Living in Lutsel K'e, you tell a story of You tell the story. Getting twisted listening to you. Snowmobiling across Great Slave Lake for 5 hours to get provisions from Yellowknife.
Yeah. So
what was it like?
Well, the prices, first of all, the selection and prices in the co-op store was astronomical. Some of the older residents, the other thing too, the elders in Lutsel K'e didn't speak English. They only spoke Chippewan. We bought snow machines, and we went to Yellowknife to buy groceries. So we had a snow machine and a sled. And we went across the Great Slave Lake, just going 100 kilometers an hour, 110. It's like a billiard table, flat, like a billiard table. You got your headlights on, and you could see little ridges where the ice bridged. So you just slow down, go over them, and then off you go again. So we went out, picked up our groceries. So we did that every month. And in the summer, I went out by boat with a resident, somebody from the community, to get my groceries. But I got to say, I was eating a lot of lake trout. I was doing a lot of fishing. And these lake trout are big because, it's a very deep lake. And there's nobody up there fishing. So these fish just get bigger and bigger and bigger. I think the biggest is a 55-pounder lake trout. But most of the time I was catching 12, 15 pound. Well, there's a lot of meat on that. Did me for the whole week, And I had it all sorts of different ways, Anyway. And caribou, they're still big hunters and gatherers. They're still living nomadic, traditional lifestyles. They're still trapping and sending the hides out to Vancouver for auction, and they're trapping all sorts: marten, foxes, wolverine, bears, and caribou. So there's a lot of caribou. So people would in the community just leave a leg of caribou outside my front door, complete with hair and hoof, and I just had to let it all thaw out and then cut it all up. It was amazing.
Tell me about attending the 10-day spiritual gathering at Old Fort Reliance.
Yeah. Well, Fort Reliance is the most eastern part. It's on a beach on the Great Slave Lake, but there's nothing there. There's just nothing there. It's just a place. But the community goes every year for 10 days. And they go as best they can. It takes at least 5 hours. I decided I wanted to go with an elder. But man, it took 10 hours because his boat was too heavy to be portaged. So we had to go the long way around. And that was quite a trip. So they put up the tents and the whole community goes, except for maybe the sick and some of the elderly. The nurse texts the nurse. There's a health center, And Tex was the resident nurse. But of course, you got to always have somebody else because she can't be on duty 24/7. So there's always another nurse comes in for 3 or 4 months at a time. But Tex was the resident nurse. So they get a plane and they fly it to Lutsel K'e and set it up as a nursing station. And I took my little tent and put it up. But it's wonderful. It's just 10 days of feasting, dancing, drumming, and they built a big sweat. And I really enjoyed the sweat. That was a really spiritual experience, the going into the sweat.
And you used bear grease?
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm surprised you knew that. Yeah. Yeah, well, in the sweat, you can't see anybody because they close the flap. It's pitch black except for the fire in the middle, blazing away. And they pour all sorts of things on it, sage. So you've got this amazing odor going on. And that's taking you, I don't know whether there's any hallucinogenic, but man, it's just a sensory experience, you know. And I'm sitting there, and then all of a sudden the guy on my right nudged me and gave me a tin. And he said, bear grease. And you take it and you smear it on your body. But it covers up the pores. It just increases the intensity of the heat and the pain. And you get to the point where you think, I got to get out of here. I'm just going to die. But it's all part of the experience. But I didn't die. Yeah, it was delicious.
And then you knew somebody named Vince?
Well, in my novel, I call him Vince. He was actually called Tommy. But in my novel, I changed people's names, you know, just to sort of protect the innocent, if you like. Tommy, yeah. Tommy Catholic was his name. And he was my boss. And he invited me to his house for his anniversary, for birthdays. I mean, everybody in the community was so welcoming. I mean, in my culture, right, in Canada, like the States, we're kind of lonely. We come out of our driveway, we wave to our neighbor, but we really don't invite him in or do things with him. You know, everybody does their own thing. Well, there it's a community. Everybody does community events. The community hall was always full. And so Tommy invited me to various events with his family. And he said, you want to come check my trap lines? And I said, love to. So one Sunday afternoon, I went and followed him into the bush to check his trap lines. And it was just a wonderful, silent world of white. Just beautiful. The sun was bright, high in the sky. He was trapping martins. And him in my big boots. And he said, you know, get my tool bag. So I went back to his sled, pulled up his big tool bag, and he said, yeah, bring it. So I brought it, and I pulled out this like big pliers. And that's when I noticed his hand was caught in a trap. It was caught in the trap. So with the pliers, I put him down, and I opened the trap, and he pulled his hand out. And man, I said, you know, what would have happened if I wasn't here, Tommy? You know, you're trapped you're in the trap. You can't get up. You can't leave because the trap is staked, frozen to the ground. His sled is like, you know, 50 feet away. And nobody knows where his traps are. Nobody comes around. I don't think even his wife knows where the traps are. The trappers were quite, you know, they were secretive about it. He said, I don't want to think about it. That's all he said. But you see, that's what I'm saying. If you're not mindfully aware, you can easily get into trouble. Now, you've been trapping all his life. He'd never had this trap. I said, how often does this happen? He said, never. I said, well, good job I'm here today. Wow. Yeah.
This is a different life than those of us who grew up in civilized,
Yeah.
quote unquote, civilized areas. What would your life have been if you didn't travel to the Northwest Territory?
Well, I think of that, Larry, and I think, there was many times when I said to myself, is this it? Is this all there is? I should have said, yeah. Yeah, be thankful, Al. You work very hard. You're just taking it easy. You're reaping the benefits. So I would have spent maybe the rest of my life playing golf, cutting grass. But because I said no, and that's the thing, Larry, I learned to say yes, not to say no. So when people ask me things, and a lot of people say, well, what if? I refuse to go there. I don't like the what ifs. I just say yes. Something happens, hey, I'll make another decision. If it didn't work out, well, I'd get on a plane and come back. No big deal. And they say, well, what if this? What if that? And I think in my culture, well, your culture too, Larry, fear is a big part. It sells products. We're very fearful. And that's why we're, well, what if? And we don't like to change, upset. We don't want to leave our comfort zone. So a lot of times we just say, no, I'm just going to stay here in my comfort zone because I know this, and I don't want to go into the unknown. But if you don't go, you don't experience, So I always said yes. With my English accent, they're probably going to say, shit, who's this bloody guy from the colonies come here to, rip us off? And it wasn't that experience at all. They're lovely.
So, in your estimation, what is the larger purpose of life? Now, there's an easy question.
Yeah, well, Larry, when I was in Bentic, my country retreat, and everything in my life, I thought, why am I not happy? I got a beautiful wife, beautiful kids, great job, beautiful home. What else is there? What more could you ask for? And yet, I knew deep down something was missing, And I thought about it. I thought, all 9 billion of us, 7, 8, 9, on this planet, all we want at the end of the day is to be happy. That's all. So what is happiness? It's really a state of mind. When I was in the corporate world, I was so ambitious. I was always changing my job every 2 years for more money, more responsibility, bigger car, just chasing, success, thinking that, okay, and I was the same. I was a yuppie. All my colleagues were the same. We were all on the same treadmill. We just, oh yeah, well, one day, we're going to retire. And we did. And that's it. It's not the be-all and end-all. There's more to life than retirement and taking it easy. And I'm so glad that I reacted when I said, is this all you're going to do? And I said, no, it isn't. I'm going to set off on a sense of adventure and see what else there is. And holy mackerel. I've done more in the last 20 years than I did really in all the rest of my life, Well, I was living very frugally, monastically, that's another story. But it was the simplicity and the frugality that I realized I don't need anything. All I need is, I just need a bed. I need some utensils. That's all I need. I don't need a lot of furnishings and, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. I don't need that. And a lot of times when we went out, obviously, we just had to go in the bushes. And anyway, yeah. So I realized that, and then I realized poor people all over the world can be happy. I know we tend to say, oh shit, they're poor, they're abjectly poor. But, what I found out later in life when I did my volunteering, the poor, they don't have much, but they're happy. And you know the big thing, Larry? Family. That's what makes them happy. Community and family. Most important things in life. Absolutely.
Tell us about your book.
Well, when I went to Lutsel K'e, my daughter gave me a journal. And she said, Dad, I want you to write in this because we know it's going to be very different up there. I said, okay, no problem, Nikki. So I began writing it the very first day out of a sense of obligation because I thought, she's going to ask me one day, how's the writing coming, Dad? And I didn't want to disappoint her. But man, so much was happening. I was scribbling away every night, and then I was scribbling away in notebooks. I was getting it all recorded. Now, of course, a lot of it is developing. And of course, at any point in time, I can't see it developing. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, next month. So by recording it in the moment, you're capturing the essence of that moment. So at the end, I was there for 2 years. Now, it was really strange, Larry, because the 2 years felt like a lifetime. I kept thinking back, trying to remember what did I do before I came to Lutsel K'e. And I was having trouble because it seemed so long ago. This 2 years seemed like a big lifetime. Anyway, I left the community and I took all those notes and I decided I'm going to go to Costa Rica. I'm going to go to a little village on the border with Panama for a month, and I'm going to take all of this stuff, key it into Word, play around with it, because it wasn't really readable. And I thought, I can't give this to Nikki. It's good. So I did that. I went for a whole month by myself to this guest cabin. And the strange thing was, as I was walking through it, some of it I was just deleting because it didn't go anywhere. And other parts were, threads, and I could see that it was the beginning of something. So I carried on writing and writing and writing. But I realized as I was writing how I was changing because I would write, in my journal, Joe came to see me today. He asked me, could I help him? I told him, who does he think I am? Personal counselor? I'm not here for that. And then, 18 months it was how can I help you, Joe? So it came out. So I went back to Canada, printed off my book, and I called it The Learning of Billy Hayes. And it started when this man went into Lutsel K'e and when he flew out. And that was it. And I gave it to lots of people and they said, wonderful. But it behooves the reader to ask, like, who was this man that when he went in there, who was he? Where did he come from? And what did he do afterwards? So I went back to the computer and carried on writing. And that was really the starting of my writing career. And I've been writing a lot. But I thought, had my daughter not gave me a journal, wow, I wouldn't have been an author. Just like that. So I wrote this book. I went right. It became a biography. Because I thought, well, okay, who was this man? Well, he was a corporate man, but where did he come from? So I went right back. So the whole thing is my biography. It's called The Awakening in the Northwest Territories. And at the back of the book, I list my awakenings, like observations, awakenings. What did I learn? Yeah. And I mentioned some of them in this broadcast.
And where can people get a copy of the book?
Oh, it's available on Amazon, but I have a website. Well, if they go to my website, there's a buy button that'll take them to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever. But if they go to my website, they can learn more about me, they can read excerpts from my book, and they can read reviews. And my website is very simply alastairhenry.com. www.alastairhenry.com.
Alastair, thanks so much for being on Specifically for Seniors. inspiring discussion. Would you consider coming back on the podcast to talk again?
I would love to. On any topic, Larry. I'd just like to share, my life, my memories, and it does inspire a lot of people. In fact, I've had a lot of people, review my book and say, it changed my life. After I read your book, I made some key decisions in my life. And, I thought, well, that's what it's all about. I don't write a book for myself, You write it for others to read and hope that they get something out of it. So I'm very happy.
Thank you. Thank you again. We'll talk again.
Thank you, Larry.
If you found this podcast interesting, fun, or helpful, tell your friends and family, and click on the follow or subscribe button. We'll let you know when new episodes are available. You've been listening to Specifically for Seniors. We'll talk more next time. Stay connected.